Good morning and welcome to Sunday Coffee, Art, Design, and Architecture. Happy Sunday morning and welcome to the show. We are coming to you from Florida on a gorgeous Sunday morning overlooking the gentle lapping waves on the Gulf of Mexico. My motivation for this podcast channel is to broadcast good news stories, interesting people, and food for thought. So pour yourself a nice hot cup of tea or coffee, take a deep breath, get cozy, and enjoy some uplifting conversations. Today's book is No Farms, No Food: Uniting Farmers and Environmentalists to Transform American Agriculture by Don Stuart, published by Island Press in 2022. Mr. Stuart is the former director of the AFT's Pacific Northwest Regional Office and has also served as the executive director for the Washington Association of Conservation Districts and executive director for Salmon Washington, a nonprofit trade association. Stuart is also the author of Barnyards and Birkenstocks: Why Farmers and Environmentalists Need Each Other. Hi, Don. Welcome to the show.
Hi, glad to be here.
Well, it's a beautiful Sunday morning, and I'm having a hot cup of tea with a spot of honey. What are you having this morning?
Hot chocolate.
Oh, that sounds nice, warm and toasty.
Yes, it is.
Well, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your educational background?
A lawyer. I started out as an attorney practicing trial law in Seattle and didn't love it. So ended up actually building a 47-foot commercial fishing boat, went commercial fishing in Alaska for salmon trolling for several years, and then came back, returned to the practice of law, didn't love it still, and ended up working for nonprofit organizations and found that incredibly gratifying. Really, really enjoyed it as a line of work. Worked for the commercial fishing industry for that organization you mentioned, Salmon Washington. It was a trade association representing commercial salmon fishermen. I lobbied for them, represented them in public. We had a public initiative, a statewide initiative that we dealt with during that time. Went to work after that for the Washington Association of Conservation Districts. I was their executive director. It's an organization that represents the conservation districts. I assume people mostly know what those are. They're all over the country. They are little, usually poorly funded government agencies that help farmers adopt conservation practices on their land, that work closely with their local governments, but they work closely with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the federal agency that was invented back in the 1930s with the Soil Conservation Service. And worked for them. That was sort of my introduction to agriculture. And then in 2000, went to work for American Farmland Trust as their Pacific Northwest regional director. Again, lobbying, representing farmers, doing public education and other projects, creating programs that help farmers preserve their land. So that's a bit of the rundown. I hope that's not too much.
Oh, no, that's interesting. So, well, no wonder. I mean, this book is really well written, and lawyers for clients, they always wrote very well.
At least it forces you to be precise.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
So I was really impressed. It was very well written. And since the audience can't see the cover, this is a beautiful cover. I love it.
Well, thanks. The cover, just as description, includes a farm in the foreground and then some sort of forest in the background. I really, really wanted a cover that conveyed both agriculture and the fact that agriculture, serious agriculture, commercial agriculture, but also the fact that agriculture exists within an environmental setting, that the two things are linked and both necessary. So that was kind of the motivation behind the cover.
Well, it is. That's a beautiful shot. I love it. Well, that kind of goes to my first question is, what was your motivation for writing this particular book?
Well, I have to say back, I guess it probably goes back to my work with Salmon for Washington, because a lot of that had to do with a bit of a ongoing battle royale between commercial and recreational fishermen. And I spent a good part of my time representing commercial fishermen and lobbying for them and fighting with recreational fishermen, and at the same time desperately trying to get everyone to figure out that they really shouldn't be fighting, they should be cooperating, because all the time we were fighting over who got to catch the fish, we were essentially fighting whoever got to catch the last one, because the salmon resource was in trouble, and we needed farmers and or fishermen and the environmental community, all commercial and recreational, all working together. So that was kind of the first introduction to that sort of conundrum that exists. And then the work with American Farmland Trust, of course, was essentially the organization exists to help farmers preserve their land and protect it from development, and also to adopt practices that help protect the environment at the same time. So helping keep and maintain commercially viable, economically viable, prosperous agriculture, but also agriculture that exists in a way that's friendly to the environment. Two things that have to go hand in hand, because after all, we need desperately to protect our cherished environment, which is in trouble, but we also need to eat, and we need our farmers to succeed their businesses. And if they go out of business, the farm's gone, the food is gone. So we've got to have both of those things, and it's not an easy thing to accomplish. And that's a task AFT has been working on for the last 40 years.
Well, that was one thing I really, when I picked up the book and to look through it, I was really impressed, like really trying to get a middle road here, trying to get some happiness on all sides. Can you tell the audience as I hadn't heard about it before, what is the American Farmland Trust? How did it start? Who, what, when, where, why, how?
Well, it's a remarkable organization, and I'd have to say I think it's more remarkable now after having written the book, because I learned so much. I'd worked for AFT for 11 years, and when I went to write this book, I learned a whole lot that I actually had not been aware of all those years I'd worked for them. They were formed in 1980 at a time when the country was just beginning to wake up to the fact that our farmland was disappearing. Agriculture in this country, a lot of the commercial, large-scale agriculture that you see and sort of conceive of exists in non-urban areas. But the fact is that a huge percentage, like something like 80-some% of our fruits and vegetables actually are grown on land that is near urban areas, that is influenced by development and development pressures. And that's, one of the things that always amazes me is to realize that in 1945, after World War II, the most productive agricultural county in the United States was Los Angeles County. And I guarantee you that's not the situation today. And that's just a mirror of what's happened all over the country. Our cities frequently grew up in areas where the people were, and the people were, by and large, in areas of agriculture. So all that flat agricultural land became wonderful for urban sprawl. And that created a serious problem. AFT was formed in an effort to address it, hopefully in a way that preserved working, successful, active, commercially viable agriculture at the same time. 1980 also, it coincided with a sort of, I guess it's sort of the serious birth of the land trust movement and of the conservation easement. I think most people are aware that what a conservation easement is. It's a legal device that allows you to place a restriction, an easement restriction on your own land that prevents its development, prevents certain activities from taking place there. So frequently, that's used to preserve environmental qualities like a treasured stream or woodland or a wetland or some other valuable environmental asset that might be vulnerable. AFT sort of picked up the technique of using that to protect agricultural land, to place an easement on the land. Usually you as a landowner approve that easement, and then you donate it, the ownership interest that the easement represents, you donate that to a land trust or maybe an appropriate public agency. They protect it and assure that value that you're protecting continues. So in our case, it'd be agriculture. The land is usually restricted in an agricultural easement so that it will be used for agriculture and never be put to any use that is inconsistent with or damaging to the serious prospect of successful agriculture on the land. So that was the second thing that was taking place there. There were like probably a handful of land trusts in 1980. Today there are like, I don't know, something like 1,500 of them all over the country. The use of conservation easements exploded. States adopted a uniform conservation easement law. Conservation easement use was allowed for charitable deduction by the IRS, so that helped. And if you were donating the easement, and then American Farmland Trust also pushed and improved and developed dramatically the technique of having a public agency created that purchased the development rights, purchased an agricultural easement from the farmer at its market value. You put an easement like that on your land, of course, you devalue it. So the difference in value between before the easement and after, AFT, part of my job with AFT was to get programs in place, and we managed to do that here in Washington that would purchase an agricultural easement from a farmer at its market value. So that's all by way of, I don't know, but that's the kind of work AFT does and all that kind of stuff, policy in the legislature, public education, all that was a part of my work.
Well, that's fascinating because I think I've heard that word in the media, except conservation, but I really never looked into it that closely or thought about it. And then you talk about it was Peggy Rockefeller is the one who really started that. Can you tell me more about her?
Yeah, she was a pretty amazing lady. She was the wife of David Rockefeller. People older, maybe of my era, will remember David Rockefeller. He was back in the 80s. He was sort of the penultimate man of wealth, maybe the Bill Gates or whatever of his day. His wife, of course, she was had quite a bit of power. She was on the board of directors of the Nature Conservancy, and they owned farms, and they themselves put conservation easements, agricultural easements on their farms. Of course, they could afford to do that, but they knew that there was no way that their neighbors, by and large, their farmer neighbors, could afford to do that. Their lands frequently, they're in debt for the land. They're borrowing against it in order to farm and grow their crops. They've got family to consider that they don't want to, arbitrarily reduce the value of their land when they've got children to consider that might someday want to farm this property or perhaps might need to sell it for some reason. So all of that, made her realize that the use of conservation easements for this was real important. She actually tried to get the Nature Conservancy to take this on, and TNC refused, I think probably for a very good reason. It was a big, huge change for them and would have been very difficult. In the end, they formed the new organization. She used to talk about it, referred to it as the Nature Conservancy for Agriculture.
I see. And so what was her or how does farming work exactly? Why doesn't it make enough money to financially sustain itself?
Boy, Disha, that's absolutely the nubbins question, and I will tell you the conclusion that I have come to by trying to kind of give you an example. Think about a piece of land that has a Walmart on it, and how much money per acre that land can generate. It's what's called by the real estate industry, the highest and best use, which a lot of us find that term sort of offensive or concerning. But basically, when land develops a market value for uses other than agriculture. So when it's close enough, for example, to the city that you could build a housing development on it, for example, or a strip mall, or some other business enterprise, even recreational properties divided up for recreational properties. When it acquires a value that people want to buy it for that other purpose, the intensity of the use, the greater intensity of the use generates more revenue, and that market value is what drives what you have to pay for that land. Agriculture is a business. is in competition globally. We're not, just talking their neighbors. They're competing with Bangladesh and France and everywhere on this planet. They don't have a lot of options about if they pay too much for that land. Remember, land has a carrying cost. Owning it is an investment. If you have $1 million invested in land, that's $1 million you can't invest in farm equipment or a lot of other things. It's money that if you borrowed it, you pay an interest on it. That interest has a cost that reduces the profitability of your business. So you have to realize that what a farmer can afford to pay for a piece of land and still have it pay is a lot different from what Walmart can pay or a commercial mall can pay or a landowner can pay. If you think about it this way, think about a square foot of space on that Walmart's shelf and what that can earn that store over the course of a year. And then think about that same square foot as bare dirt growing a crop. That square foot might generate a crop that's worth a few pennies. You know what I mean? The profit margin, the profit that can be earned off a square foot of land in agriculture is obviously always going to be greatly less. And it's far too facile to simply say we should pay more for our food. That's just, I'm sorry, never going to happen. And if it did happen, we'd all be starving to death. So I just got to say this is a problem that's got to somehow be solved, and the American Farmland Trust took it on.
I'm just kind of overwhelmed. It's like, you think about, it's like, well, we have to eat.
We have to eat. We have to protect our environment. And those two things are, can be at odds. Just like driving a car, we need them. We need to drive these cars, but we also need to protect our environment. And how do we do both of those things successfully and practically and in a way that works? It's not.
Well,
These are not easy problems to solve, and this is one of the biggest because farms generate have a carbon footprint. Food has a carbon footprint, and the farms do. I might add, farms also managed properly can actually be a net carbon sink. So we have real opportunities in agriculture, but we just have to get it right.
Well, when I was going to graduate school and I would drive from Key Largo up to 8th Street in Miami, and I would drive through Homestead, even over the course of those few years, I just shocked. The farmland was just disappearing. And the people who had been longtime residents of that area were just really dispirited because they're like, this used to be beautiful. We used to have beautiful tomatoes and agriculture. And it's like, what are we going to do? And then they're building in an area. Hate to say it, it's very hurricane prone down there. And it's like, oh my gosh. I mean, how are those farmers, how are they even making it anyway? That was a long question. I'm not sure that was an answer. I don't know what that was.
Well, it's tough. I mean, it is a tough business. It's globally competitive, and it's difficult. They certainly can't make it if they're paying too much for the land they're operating on. If they're paying a development price for the property that they're growing crops on, they're probably not profitable. And so that loss, that thing you're talking about, that seeing that happening all over the country, very tragic. Actually, right here where I live in the Pacific Northwest, I live on an island just a little bit outside of Seattle, a place called Vashon Island. And right here in our county, King County, in 1978, just shortly before AFT was formed, they created a farmland protection program that used purchased agricultural easements. Farmers would sign an easement and be paid the market value for the reduction that resulted from that easement in the value of their land. They created a program right here in King County, still exists today. It was one of the first in the country. Probably the very first was in upstate New York or upstate top end of Long Island County up there. Tried it. And then I think some places in Maryland and Massachusetts made some efforts. And it was just beginning happening. Probably were less than a handful of programs around the country in 1980 when AFT formed. Big part of AFT's mission was to create more of them.
What happens when farms fail? And when, like, say they're in Homestead down Miami area, they're just disappearing. I was just amazed at how fast it was just disappearing in a few years span. What happens when a farm fails?
Gosh, you're so good because you just nailed the key question, because there's an awful tendency to people to say, oh, well, the farmer's the enemy, right? And we got a darn farmer. Let's the heck with the farms. If they can't operate property, then heck with them. We don't need them. Well, we do need them. And
Yeah.
the problem is that when they fail, there might be by and large, they do not return. When they fail, they typically do not return to native forest or wetland or stream bank. When a farm fails, it these days almost always means that it's going to be, unless it can be bought by another farmer, who, keep in mind, the new farmer is going to face the same problems the old farmer faced. So if a farm fails, then there's a reason for that. If it just isn't practical to operate a farm on that land, what happens is the land falls to its, quote, highest and best use. It falls to a more intensive use. You and I know that if it falls to a more intensive use, that use is not going to be friendly to the environment. So one of the things that happens when a farm fails is it's a net environmental loss. Even if the farm wasn't being managed particularly well, it's still a net environmental loss. And so what our objective needs to be, keep these farms in agriculture wherever we can, and make sure that they're managed in a way that's friendly to the environment. Though that right there is that's the American Farmland Trust. Basically, that's their mission.
Well, I was surprised. I was in the landscape architecture program, and I was a little bit older than some of my classmates. And I grew up in a rural area, and we had an outdoor garden. I was in 4-H, and it's like, we had a little garden. We did consider it pretty well, but it was hard work. I remember the kids were like, yeah, we just had kind of like this daydream idea of a farm. And I'm like, oh, we just have a farm and make all of our food. I'm like, do you know how much work it is? Have you even had a garden, people?
It is work.
What are the differences between like environmental and national farmland land uses, water quality, soil erosion, wild habitat? We got toxic chemicals. What did they come up with? Did they come up with any ideas how to manage some of this?
So we all know about the old Soil Conservation Service, right? We had the big Dust Bowl in the 1930s. The sky was darkening in Washington, D.C. when they held the hearings on it. One of the members of Congress or witnesses dramatically walked over to the side of the hearing room and pulled the curtain aside and pointed to the sky and said, "That is agriculture disappearing in America." This was in Washington, D.C., and that's kind of a famous tableau that I hope is true. I've heard about. So they created the Soil Conservation Service, which was very successful, actually, helping farmers voluntarily adopt practices that would preserve the soil. Well, over the years, of course, it became about much more than soil. And along about, 1997 or thereabouts, the name of the agency was actually changed from the Soil Conservation Service to the Natural Resources Conservation Service. It included forestry, and it included all of these conservation practices. And I'm not sure, most people probably have some familiarity with the fact that there are these conservation practices that farmers adopt. It started in the 30s with just the soil, but it's gone way beyond that because, of course, it's about a lot more than just preserving the soil on the farm. It's also about preserving environmental quality that the farm impacts off the farm. So when that soil runs off the farm, for example, into the local stream and carries with it chemicals and pesticides and other stuff, undesirable stuff, or when the trees get cut down and climate is injured, or when there's spray put on the trees and it gets into the stream and it kills or misdirects or destroys salmon runs and other fish. and wildlife, and you can go on and on. All of those matters are all matters that are profoundly affected by agriculture. And though, and here's the big catch, and that agriculture can do something about, and usually do something about it and remain profitable if they get a little help. Farmers, given the right sort of strategic assistance, can actually take dramatic steps. So that first thing, when you asked me that earlier question about what happens when a farm goes away, the answer to that is usually nothing good for the environment. This question is kind of the question that lies on top of that. And that is, so when you have a farm and it's being managed or it's causing harm, what can you do about that? And the answer is a whole lot. A whole lot can be done about it. Usually a good deal of it. Some of it is actually productive financially. Some of these practices being adopted by the farmer actually can improve the farmer's bottom line, which is great. Some of them are kind of neutral. They cost something, but maybe they actually earn a little something back. Sometimes they actually can be profitable to do. But the bottom line is they're all expensive to accomplish, some more than others. And these farmers are in competition with one another all across the planet. So you can't just say willy-nilly, a farmer should pay for that. I think I tend to agree that if a farmer is causing problems for the environment, the farmer should be responsible. But a lot of what we're asking farmers to do, and the farm industry should be responsible, but a great deal of what we're asking farmers to do has nothing to do with anything that the farmer has done. It's actually trying to get farmers to make up for damage that's being done by all the rest of us. And it's a continuum, right? And so it's not easy to solve because you don't have a one-size-fits-all solution to these problems. Essentially, what is needed is some really serious, both public programs, both federal and state and local, that help farmers adopt practices that keep their land healthy, that support and help the environment, that get them into preserving and protecting good soil, that keeps the ground planted with crops and prevents it from getting blown away or washed away into the air or into the local stream, that prevents carbon from escaping and sequesters it instead in the soil. All of that is all stuff that is so amazingly possible that just as an example with respect to climate science, it's actually quite doable for agriculture to become a net carbon sink, that agriculture actually could be a net positive with respect to the climate if we just play our cards right. But all it would take is a little help for these farmers. So that's a task that AFT actually undertook real early, or began to undertake real early in its formation. And that was sort of the basis for the very first conservation title in the American Farm Bill back in 1985. A real interesting story.
Well, how did she start building these coalitions? Because you talked about how, boy, it was really tough even for her at first, even though she was a Rockefeller. How did she start to build these coalitions of people and try to bring both sides to the table?
Interesting, because that's, picture it from AFT's point of view. So you're this new organization. You know that if you walk into a member of Congress, into their office, or a state legislator's office, and you say, I've got this great idea to help agriculture. We want to help them be more environmentally responsible, and we want to help them protect their farm so it doesn't fall to development. We got these great ideas. You know, and I know, the very first question that at least half of those legislators are going to ask is going to be, well, so tell me, where are the farmers on this? And if your answer to that question is, well, gee, gosh golly, we haven't really asked them, I'm sorry, your history, you're out of there. You're not going to get any help. And the other half of the legislators, you're going to go in and tell them we've got these great ideas to help farms. And they're going to say, well, so where's the environmental community? Where are the environmentalists on this? And likewise, if you don't have a good answer to that question, your history. So it was evident. It became evident. I'm not sure how early it was evident, but it certainly had to have become evident pretty early on that you had to have both agriculture and the environmental community. And I'm not talking just some far off in the on the edges of the movement kind of component of environmentalism, or some odd, unusual, farm group. You needed to have mainstream commercial agriculture, and you needed to have mainstream environmental community, the mainstream environmentalists, on board, or you weren't going to get anywhere. And that created for AFT, I think, a conundrum that had not really been faced by other organizations. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are others that have faced something very similar. But certainly with American Farmland Trust, they weren't getting anywhere with their mission unless they had both farmers, serious commercial farmers, farmers of all kinds and stripes, and environmentalists, mainstream environmentalists, on board with their effort. And lo and behold, 1985 comes around. AFT organizes this conservation coalition that included farmers, environmentalists, mainstream, all kind of varieties and stripes. And they adopted the very first conservation title in the history of the American Farm Bill. They began the creation of the farm conservation programs, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, a program that pays farmers typically a 50% cost share for the installation of good conservation practices on their farm. Farmer pays the rest and pays the cost of maintaining it over time. But that's very frequently enough to get farmers to go along. And that was all created in 1985 in that conservation title. The beginnings, the very nascent beginnings of a farmland protection program were also kind of at least began to get consideration at that time. But that stuff, they had a program in that title that farmers have gotten always for years and years received subsidies, as you know, for at least commercial commodity crop farmers. We're talking wheat, sugar, soy, cotton, corn, all the kind of dry bulk commodities. Those commodities have been receiving price support subsidies of one variety or description or another for years. Well, they were told in 1985 that if they were going to farm vulnerable lands, so in this case, wetlands, or especially dry, highly erodible, steep, dry, highly erodible lands, they were going to have a conservation plan in place on their property, on that land, and they were going to have conservation practices in place. If they didn't, they would not get their subsidy with respect to that land, and it was a huge motivator for them. There was the Conservation Reserve Program happened in 1985. It's a program that farmers were used to being paid not to grow crops. That was originally in the Farm Bill many years ago to hopefully raise the price, reduce the amount of product and raise the price. That had kind of gone by 1985. But instead, farmers were now going to be paid to set aside land for long periods of time, like 10, 15 years, and to plant native habitat on those properties, for which they got financial help. And they would then be paid a lease payment by the federal government to keep their land that way. That was called the Conservation Reserve Program, still exists in dramatically increased form today. It's probably the most popular farm bill program of all time. That program was created in 1985 with support from the mainstream environmental community, from the agriculture community, and from the recreational hunters, from the sporting community, who were very concerned about the fact that the bird populations, migratory birds, couldn't make it through America, and they needed habitat and stopovers. And these conservation reserve properties, this leased land on agricultural land all across the country, helped provide bird habitat, and hunters loved it, and they support those programs vigorously still today.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yes, I did study about the migrating birds and their missing habitat, and it's kind of just all falling apart.
Yeah, it still is. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest things that was ever done with respect to that. Let me tell you also, by the way, that those programs that were adopted in 1985 to prevent largely focused still on soil conservation, but keeping soil on the farm and out of streams. They did a study in about 1983 of soil loss and erosion and down the Mississippi Delta and the Mississippi Valley and what was happening in the Mississippi. And they repeated that study in about 1994 or 5. I may have the date wrong, might be 93. In any case, soil loss in American agriculture had actually been reduced. Hold your breath, because to me, 40% soil loss in American agriculture over that 10 or so year period had actually been reduced by something like 40%. And the only thing that had changed was the conservation title of the Farm Bill. And to me, that's just a dramatic proof of how effective these programs can be if we're prepared to adopt them and follow through on them.
Well, I thought it was interesting too, sidetracking just a little bit, is, they started, you said in a book about farmers markets in the DC area to try to, how did a city and urban people lose track of our food, how it's grown, and how are these farmers markets kind of helping that?
I just think farmers markets are incredible. I actually think farmers markets can be credited with a great many of the things that have happened in throughout commercial agriculture in America. Think about it. The first motivation for organic agriculture started because farmers were marketing their crops directly to the public, and the public was starting to get worried about pesticides in the food they ate. So the whole organic movement really started in that direct market setting in farmers markets. That's where it started, and it grew, as we all know now, to a dramatic. It's become a dramatic thing, but that's where it began. Farmers markets, I think, deserve a lot of credit for that. Farmers markets also deserve credit for many of the sort of certifications that we have. So you have farms that are certified here in the Pacific Northwest, for example. There's one called Salmon Safe, where if you buy a product that's certified as salmon safe, you know it was grown with respect and responsibility toward salmon habitat. There are certifications all over the country for products that are grown with responsible labor practices, products that have been grown with responsible environmental qualities. Remember, organic only deals really with pesticides. It does not necessarily deal with or respond to other environmental concerns, like whether a farm is polluting or causing other kinds of environmental problems. But many of these other certification programs do deal with those issues. They certify that that farm is being managed in an environmentally responsible way. And again, those certifications, much of that started with the direct market stuff going on in farmers markets. And I would have to say, I think farmers markets also really kicked off and helped to enhance the longstanding tradition of roadside stands and other sort of direct market venues. People got used to buying their products directly from the farmer and just began to see this whole phenomenon differently. I just think farmers markets are incredibly valuable for just the reason that you're sort of referred to. They put agriculture in touch with their marketplace and with the people that they're selling to, and they put the public in touch with the farmers that are producing the product. So the public's more educated, understands the issues, can buy products more responsibly and intelligently.
Well, let me ask you, what was your favorite part about writing this book?
Oh, I think learning the miracles of collaboration that AFT discovered. I mean, truly, there's an awful tendency for me, and it's not exactly what I really understood the book was going to be about when I set out. But AFT is an incredible case in point of an organization that learned quickly that in order to succeed in the public policy arena, they had to collaborate. Collaboration, by the way, is not the same thing as negotiation. Collaboration is getting together to find creative new solutions and to put those solutions in place. It doesn't necessarily mean you're giving something up. It very likely means you're gaining something. Everybody's gaining something. And AFT realized early on that there was massive power in that. And over the years, that knowledge has just matured and grown to the point where it's really kind of an amazing phenomenon, the organization today and what it does and the kinds of things it's undertaking to accomplish. Right now, one of its major efforts is to put agriculture on a climate friendly footing. And you'd think, well, that's going to surely cause all kinds of political difficulties, and you're not going to be able to get farmers to participate in that. Fact of the matter is, that's not the case at all. Agriculture is participating in it. And partly they're participating in it because they see the economic benefit of it. They see that it's necessary, and they see that in order for them to succeed, we all have to succeed. So we see, hopefully, that in order for us to have a climate-friendly agriculture, we have to have an agriculture, because we have to both preserve the environment, of course, and eat. So I guess for me, the power of collaboration, the realization. So picture you're a legislator. Maybe you just got elected. Maybe you ran for office for some purpose. It could have been anything, something that concerns you. So you're a new legislator, and there's certain things you care a lot about. But the first thing you realize when you go to the legislature, your first session, is that Washington's a very average, typical state, right? Our state here in Washington, we have literally thousands, like 4, 5, 6,000 more bills that are filed in the state legislature every single legislative session. Well, God, that deals with everything. It deals with everything under the sun. And believe me, there may be some of those you know a lot about because you care about the issue. And there may be others that you get educated on, right? And maybe you get on a committee that's specialized. But the bottom line remains, you don't know anything about the vast majority of that legislation. And the last thing you want to do is to have to vote on it, because you know that every single one of those bills has people that love it and people that hate it. Every year in the legislature, you have people that come there specifically to fight. So obviously you got the union movement and the business community, right? They're always enemies, or not always, but frequently they are enemies on issues. When I worked for the fishermen, it was commercial and sport fishermen. Every year we showed up there fighting over one bill or maybe a bevy of bills. In our case, for this discussion, agriculture, farmers, and environmentalists, you expect them to show up there. You expect them to fight over a bill. And what you don't want to do is to have to vote on these bills, because you know that whatever way you vote, you don't really care as a legislator. And whatever way you do vote, you're going to create half of the people are going to be enemies. They're going to be angry with you for it. Here's what happens. One day you show up in the legislature and they call a bill up and for hearing, and for the people who are going to come forward and testify. And so the chair of the committee says, well, okay, so let's call up the people that are pro for this legislation, the people in favor. I'll call up a few names that have signed up here. He names a couple of people. Will those two come forward and sit down, and we'll have them testify? Then we'll bring up a couple of people who are con and whatever. So you're sitting there and you watch the first person comes forward, sits down, and this is maybe let's say this is the president of the local farm bureau, and he or she sits down and it prepares to testify. And then you see the second person walk up, and this person, maybe it's the Sierra Club, who knows, the Nature Conservancy, and they sit down, and you look and you kind of take a double take and you look around at everybody else and you wait a minute, what in the earth is going on here? These two people are coming up here both to testify in favor of the same legislation. This can't be. And basically, the thing to know about collaboration and the power of collaboration and the political power that it carries is that in that moment when those two people, those two perennial opponents, sit down to testify in favor of the same legislation at the same time, that bill, I'm telling you, that bill has passed. It's passed. I'm sorry. It doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. It doesn't matter whatever happens. That bill has as good as passed in that moment, because that just never happens. And it's such a massive relief. every legislator on that committee, you included, are going to be saying, oh my God, what a relief. This is a shoo-in. And that's the power of collaboration. And if you can tap into that power, you can make magic happen in the policy arena.
Oh, that's very insightful. Yes, that's true. I guess because then they're like, oh my gosh, this is a win-win. It's like a bluebird.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Go for it. Oh man, all holds are off. It doesn't matter what's in the bill. The bill will pass.
That's a win. Next.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've seen that, and I have seen that happen. I saw it happen with sport fishermen and the commercial one time here in Washington. And it's just amazing. It's an amazing thing to see.
Oh, well, that's a good lesson for all of us then.
I have no doubt that's what happened in 1985 with the conservation title.
Oh, how fascinating. Well, I guess though, we're going to have to prioritize helping these farmers though somehow because we all still need to eat. And I like to eat good food. And so does my kitty cat.
Well, I cannot agree with you more. And we need to make that. We need to eat. We need to make it affordable. And agriculture needs to survive just because its existence is good for the environment, but also because the possibilities that it presents, the opportunities that it presents for improving the environment are so dramatic. If you lose the farm and that farm becomes a development, I can tell you, I'm sorry, that those opportunities are gone.
Once a house sits on it, that's it.
Mm-hmm. And it's never going back.
No, I've never seen any of it go back. Never.
Not with 8 billion people. We just apparently are just turning 8 billion on the planet. When I was a kid, that was 2.5 billion. So it took, say, 250,000 years for humans to grow to the point, humans, after we'd evolved to more or less our current condition, 250,000 years later, we had 2.5 billion people on this planet. And then in one lifetime, in just a single lifetime, that's become 5.5 billion more. Just unbelievable.
That is unbelievable. It's like we're going to have to figure out. We're going to have to do some figuring out.
Yep. Yep. And some collaboration.
And some collaboration.
So you asked me early on why I wrote the book and what I learned in writing it. That's the biggie, and why I think, and why it turned into something quite different from a history of an organization, because instead it really tells a case history of a really amazing story of how collaboration has accomplished miracles. That story I tell about the 1985 Farm Bill, that has now been replicated in Farm Bill after Farm Bill ever since, and resulted in what we now know as our modern conservation practices and conservation title. And it's also been replicated all over the country in state legislatures and frequently at the county level as well.
Yes, and I think too, the book offers a deeper understanding of things instead of just a surface understanding, and really getting, the devil's in the details.
Yeah, it certainly is. That's partly what AFT's problem has always been. AFT staffers, like I was, tend to be technocrats, and you get it, you want to do more of it, but really the public needs to understand it, and they need to support it. And they're never going to support it if they don't understand it. And they got to see that they're getting something out of it. And believe me, they are.
Oh, well, maybe this podcast will help.
Maybe it will. I really appreciate being able to do this. I've got to have both farms and a healthy environment.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that's a good point to end on. Constructive solutions.
And creative ones.
Well, Don, you know what? Thank you. I know we've taken up a lot of your time today, and I want to thank you so much for being here. This has been a great conversation. So I'd like for you to tell the audience, what are you working on next?
Well, my wife and I, we're in the process of, my wife, Charlotte Stuart, and I are in the process of getting prepped for publication, a book we wrote together. It's called Midnight for Justice. It's a military legal thriller, sort of a mystery legal adventure thriller that was starts out back in 1978, post Vietnam War, deals with some smuggled arms, and at the end of the war, and some crazy groups and that are getting the hold of those arms, and has a trial. A guy is accused of murder, and the protagonists, a woman who's with the American Farmland Trust, the American Civil Liberties, I've got it in my brain here. American Civil Liberties Union volunteer comes in on this trial to help defend this guy who's accused of murder, and the other person is the Navy military lawyer that represents the guy as well, and the two of them are forced to work together, even though they don't see eye to eye on much, and then they end up defending this guy and having some adventures in that time. And the next thing you know, it's that trial's over, and all that's long forgotten. It's 40 years later. They're practicing law in Seattle. Suddenly, the whole thing, they're defending insurance companies and whatnot, and the whole thing comes in the door in the form of an insurance claim case, and they're all back in this whole big mess that started 40 years earlier. All kinds of excitement, adventures up in north end of Vancouver Island and in British Columbia, and all kind of, boating adventures and all that kind of thing. It's being published by Touchpoint Press, and we're very excited about it. It's co-authored by the two of us, and if this book succeeds, we definitely want to write more together.
Oh, wow. So really, you love writing.
Yeah, I'm retired, so I get to do what I want.
Well, congratulations on that.
It's a very great state. I am very pleased about it.
Well, we look forward to hearing more about you and your books in the future. And I'm going to let our audience, my cup of tea is gone. So as your chocolate gone?
Yeah, gone, and the cold dregs.
It's cold drinks now. So I'm going to let our audience know that this particular book is No Farms, No Food: Uniting Farmers and Environmentalists to Transform American Agriculture by Don Stuart, published by Island Press in 2022. And thank you for being here today.
Bless you, Tricia. It was very enjoyable. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And for our audience, I will see you next week.